we have two beasts or two ram, a ram, a he-goat. The first one had two horns. One of the horn was higher than the other horn, and the horn that was higher came up last. That means the lower horn was established before, and then the second horn came up. So what we did was we went through the history of the Medes because the two horns represents the Medes and the Persians. We went through the history of the Medes and how they got to that point where the two kingdoms merged together under Cyrus the Great, and that kingdom lasted for 220 years. Then we saw a he-goat, a goat with one horn came up after that. That is Daniel chapter 8, verse 5. And we said that between Daniel chapter 8, verse 4 and verse 5, there was 220 years. So then the second beast in Daniel, or creature in Daniel chapter 8, was the he-goat with one horn between his eyes. And the one horn represents the king of the Greek Empire. All right. And then what happened was the two goats had a fight, and the goat with the one horn had the upper hand, and the goat with the one horn did battle. And this battle took place 220 years after the Medes and the Persian Empire started. The Medes and the Persian Empire started with Cyrus the Great, but when this battle took place, it was 220 years later, and the king was Darius III. So this is what we did last day, and we said the horn on the he-goat represents the first king of the Greco-Macedonian Empire, and that horn represented Alexander the Great. And we talked about Alexander the Great. At age 18, he had his first battle. At age 20, he became king. At age 32, he died. And we said some Bible teachers would say he died at 33 years old. I say he died at 32 years old. And we explain why I show you the difference. Because if a king dies in a part of a year, like let's say in September of a year, they give that whole year to that king. And the next king would start his reign from the following year. So this is how we get the discrepancy between some people saying 32 years and some people saying 33 years of age that Alexander the Great died. Now, when Alexander the Great died, we had four horns came up in his place. This did not happen overnight. It happened after 15 years. And the reason why it took so long for these four horns to come up. And one thing I want you to remember was when the he-goat came on the scene, and he had this horn between his eyes. In verse 5, it was said that was a notable horn. By the time you reach Daniel chapter 8, verse 8, it was a great horn. So the horn grew and became great. When the horn was broken, four notable horns came up, and they replaced Alexander the Great. But I said it took 15 years later before these four horns were established. And the reason for that was Alexander's wife was pregnant. Roxana was pregnant with this child. They had to wait and see if it's a boy, if he could be king. Just give me 1 second. Lana, I talk to you later. I have a class right now. All right. Bye-bye. Yes. Roxana, she had a child, and also Alexander the Great had a brother by the name of Philip III. So they had to see if his child or his brother would become king, and they killed Roxana, they killed Alexander the Great's child, they killed his brother, and there was fighting in between these four guys, and they settled 15 years later with these four horns. We would see a little more of these horns. Now remember, the four horns in Daniel chapter 8 was the four heads of the leopard in Daniel chapter 7. Remember, we talked about Daniel chapter 7 with the four beasts, and Daniel chapter 8 we saw two of the four beasts, the second and the third. We did not see the first, which was Babylon, because Babylon was on the decline, almost reached the end of their lifespan. So the four heads correspond with the four horns in that replaced Alexander the Great. And we have these four guys, the Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. These were the four generals that took Alexander's place. Now, therefore, the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. Remember, I told you the horn started off as a notable horn, and then it became great by Daniel chapter 8, verse 8. That horn was broken. When that horn was broken, four notable horns came up. The reason why I'm showing you the scripture here is sometime this week I saw a guy teaching on this verse, and he said, and I'm going a little forward, the four winds. And what I want you to observe here is the notable, for it came up four notable ones towards the four winds of heaven. All this is telling you is the directions that the horns were facing. But the four horns came out of that great horn, which was Alexander the Great. I want you to remember this as we go forward. The four winds is just telling us the direction that the four horns were facing. And I showed you the map last day, and I showed you the directions in which these four guys or generals control the empire that was built by Alexander the Great. So let's go on. So now we have the ram, the he-goat with one horn. When that horn was broken, we had four horns took his place, which was Seleucus, Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Cassander. Now out of one of these horns came a little horn. This is a little horn on the side here. And the rest of the chapter 8, we will be talking about this little horn. All right, the rest of the chapter is taken up with this little horn. So we're no longer talking about the ram with the two horns. Their kingdom has passed. They lasted for 220 years. And the he-goat with the one horn represents Greece, and Greece is still in control. And when the Greco-Macedonian Empire was broken up, it was controlled by four of Alexander's generals. And now we are looking at the little horn, and it is still the Greco-Macedonian Empire. We are still dealing with the Greco-Macedonian Macedonian Empire. So who is this? Who is this little horn? We talked about this last day. We said his name was Antiochus or Antiochus the Fourth, and he added the title Epiphanes to his name. He was Antiochus, or you want to say Antiochus the Fourth, but he added the word Epiphanes, meaning illustrious one or God manifest. You know, they exalt themselves to be gods. So it is Antiochus Epiphanes, and he called himself Antiochus the Fourth, and he called himself Epiphanes. He was a Greek king of the Seleucid Empire, and he came from Syria. The Seleucid Empire was run by a guy named Seleucus, and Seleucus, his empire was from Syria all the way up to India, Pakistan. He reigned over Syria from the year 175 to 164 BCE. So this is the little horn that we are talking about now. We are no longer talking about the Greco-Macedonian Empire, although that empire is still existing, and the little horn came out of that empire. We are talking about, for the rest of this chapter, the little horn. The little horn was a type of the Antichrist. He was not the Antichrist. He was a type of the Antichrist. And some of the things you see that he is doing, the Antichrist will be doing that same thing when he comes. So what I'm telling you is, Antiochus Epiphanes, he came already. He existed already. He was alive already, and then he died. But the Antichrist is yet to come. So this is the difference between the little horn in chapter 8 and the little horn in chapter 7. This little horn came out of the third kingdom, which is the Greco-Macedonian kingdom. You'll find that in Daniel chapter 8, verse 9. The first little horn came out of the fourth kingdom. That is Daniel chapter 7, verse 7 and 8. The first little horn will uproot 3 of the 10 horns in Daniel chapter 7, verse 8. This is one of the main things that he will do. This is the first little horn in Daniel chapter 7. So I want you to see the separation between these two horns. You have a little horn in chapter 7. You have a little horn in chapter 8. The little horn in chapter 8, we know his name. We know he came already. And we can now look back and see some of the things that he did. The little horn in chapter 7 is yet to come. He will be coming sometime in the future. And the first thing he will do is uproot 3 of the 10 horns. But this little horn in chapter 8 is different. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. So he did 3 things, but the 2 main things he did was he take away the daily sacrifice. We dealt with this last week. We talked about the daily sacrifice. So that's one of the things he will do. Compared to the first horn that is yet to come, he will uproot 3 of the 10 horns. This little horn, he is concerned with the temple and the little sacrifice and the daily sacrifice. And the place of his sanctuary will be cast down. They are talking about the temple in Jerusalem. He will be messing with the temple in Jerusalem. And the second line, or the second sentence, the prince of the host, I told you the host is the Jewish people. The host is the Jewish people. So let us take a look at the daily sacrifice just for a minute. Now this is that which thou shalt offer upon the altar. 2 lambs of the first year, day by day continuously. The 1 lamb thou shalt offer in the morning, and the other lamb thou shalt offer in the evening. This is the daily sacrifice that we talked about last day. We said when they offered the lamb in the morning, they would take flour and they would take oil as a meal offering, and then they will take wine as a drink offering, and together with the lamb. That is the morning sacrifice. And then the evening sacrifice will be a repeat of the morning sacrifice. We also said the morning sacrifice will take place at 9 in the morning, and the evening sacrifice will take place at 3 in the evening. And I also told you, and I showed you the scripture verse, that Jesus was nailed to the cross at 9 o'clock in the morning. The sun went dark at 12 o'clock. That is when they tied the second lamb to the altar. And then at 3 in the evening, Jesus died. So Jesus was our daily sacrifice, as we see in the scriptures last day. So this is the daily sacrifice that we were talking about. And Antiochus Epiphanes will take away the daily sacrifice. Let's go on. And the host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. So he will take away the daily sacrifice and he will replace it with something else. And that will be a transgression. And it cast down the truth to the ground and did practice and prospered. So regardless of what this guy did, he prospered. He cast the truth to the ground, and we will be looking at this in a second, but I want to detour a little bit and share something with you in this slide. Now, this slide is important that you understand what is taking place. So this is like a timeline. This first circle talks about in the third year of the reign of Belshazzar. So this will be 535 BCE. When the he-goat came from the west, it will be this circle, and it will be in the year 330 BCE. This will be 220 years difference. And then when the four notable horns came up, this will be at 308, and this would be including the 12 years of Alexander the Great and the 15 years that it took to establish the four generals. This will be 22 years. And when the little horn came up, this is the little horn we are talking about, he came up in the year 175. This will be about 125 years later. So we are talking about 125 plus 22 plus 200, that'll be 300, about, let's say 350 years from the time that Daniel was writing Daniel chapter 8. Now this circle here represents the year 400. What happened in the year 400? The book of Malachi was written. This is the last book in the New Testament. The book of Malachi was written. Therefore, everything else that we would learn did not come from the Bible, but it came from history. And I want you to understand this going forward. The book of Malachi, you know, between Malachi and Matthew, there is a 400-year gap that the Lord was silent. There were no prophets. Nobody said anything. So the information that we are going to get from this point on will be from history. Okay, so what did I do here? Give me a second. Okay. Just give me 1 second. Let me get rid of this. I don't know how I got to this point. Okay, we will have to work with this for the time being. I see they are recording everything that I said at the bottom there. So where do we get this information from? You can get this information from a guy by the name of Herodotus. And Herodotus, he is known as the father of history. You can get this information from Josephus. He was a Jewish historian of the first century. Or you can get the information from the Maccabee, which is Maccabee 1 and 2. And this is the one I chose, Maccabee 1 and 2, to get the information of what happened between that period of silence. So here we go. But before we go there, I told you we will have to come back to this, the truth. It cast the truth to the ground. This is Daniel chapter 8, verse 12. And how did we get to here? It cast the truth to the ground. What is the truth? Now in the New Testament, John chapter 17, verse 17, sanctify them through thy truth, thy word is truth. Now in Matthew chapter 4, Jesus said, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceed out of the mouth of God. And the word that he was talking about was the Torah. Sanctify them through thy truth, thy word is truth. Thy word he is talking about is Torah. And the word was made flesh and dwelt among us. That word was the Torah. So what did he do? He cast the Torah to the ground. And he outlawed certain things. He outlawed circumcision. That was in the Torah. He outlawed the Sabbath. That was in the Torah. He forced the Jews to eat pigs. That was in the Torah. So let us look at these three things that he did, which is not just three things that he did. He did a lot more than three things. But let's look at this one. He outlawed circumcision. And in 2 Maccabees 6, verse 8 through 10, I would read it for you just in case you don't see it properly. Moreover, there went out a decree to the neighbor cities of the heathen by the suggestion of Ptolemy. Ptolemy was the king of Egypt against the Jews, that they should observe the same fashions and be partakers of their sacrifices, and whoso would not conform themselves to the manner of the Gentiles should be put to death. What they are saying is the Jewish people should conform to the things that Antiochus Epiphanes instruct them to do, and if they don't do it, they shall be put to death. So verse 10 tells us there were two women brought who had circumcised their children, whom when they had openly led them around the city, the babies hanging at their breasts, they cast them down headlong from the wall. So these two women circumcised their babies, and what Antiochus did, he killed the babies, hung them around the neck of the woman, and parade them around the city, and at the end of the day, cast them from the city wall and kill them. This is simply because they circumcised their children. He outlawed the Sabbath. Look at this one. 2 Maccabees 6:11. The other that had run together into caves nearby to keep the Sabbath secretly. These were Jews who wanted to keep the Sabbath because God commanded them to keep the Sabbath. being discovered by Philip were all burnt together because they had a conscience to help themselves for the honor of the most sacred day. Now, I want you to understand that we do not use the Maccabee or the books of the Maccabee 1 and 2 is not part of our scripture. It is not part of our canon. But today I am using it as a historic document to explain to you what happened during that period of silence. When Antiochus Epiphanes took over and what he did to the Jews. This is what I'm sharing with you, and it is from the book of Maccabee, and we are using it as a historic document. He forced the Jews to eat pigs. Look at this one. Second Maccabees 6:18 through 19. Eleazar, one of the principal scribe, an aged man, and of well-favored countenance, was constrained to open his mouth. They held him down, opened his mouth, and stuffed his mouth with the flesh of swine or the flesh of a pig. But he, choosing rather to die gloriously than to live strained with such an abomination, spit it forth, and came of his own accord to the torment. So they tortured him, they held him down, constrained him, forced his mouth open, filled his mouth with pig meat or pork, and he spit it out, and he chose to die instead. So this is what Antiochus Epiphanes was doing to the Jewish people during this time when he was king of Syria. So then I heard Daniel chapter 8 verse 13. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint that would speak, how long? How long shall the vision concerning the daily sacrifice? How long the transgression of desolation? How long to give this as the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? So the question is, how long will this go on? How long will the daily sacrifice be taken away from us? How long will they put the statue of Zeus in the temple? How long will they sacrifice pig on the altar of burnt offering? How long will the temple be given over to these heathens? And how long will the host? Remember I told you the host is the Jewish people. How long will the Jewish people be treading underfoot? So this is the question. And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. So two things is going to happen during this time. The temple will be given back, the sacrifice of swine will stop, and all these things that was happening to the Jewish people will stop, and the sanctuary will be cleansed. But we have a problem in this verse, and the problem is with this word days. This is the problem. We have a problem with this word days. If you were to read a modern version, you will not see the word days, 2,300 days. You will not see that. This is the original language, the first line. Now, really, I don't know what all of this means, so don't think I'm smart. However, the first line is the Hebrew, and the line underneath is the interpretation. And I just can't get back my screen. I don't know how to do that. Hold on. Okay, I can't get back that. Okay, so here we go. This word here is boka. Boka means morning. This word here is erev. Erev means evening. So it should have read, and he said to me, for evening morning 2,300, then shall be cleansed the sanctuary. So it should be evening and morning. However, the word they used was tov, T-O-V. And T-O-V, they interpret this as tov, which means days. So that is wrong. In your Bible, it says days. It should be evening and morning. So this is where the problem is. Instead of using the word boka and erev, they use the word tov. So that's why in your Bible, King James Version, you will find the word days. It should be like this. And he said unto me, 2,300 evenings and mornings, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. So remember, we are talking about the daily sacrifice. How long will the daily sacrifice be suspended? How long will the temple be cast underfoot? How long will the Jewish people suffer? Until 2,300 evenings and mornings. So I very quickly did a slide for you here. 2,300 divided by 2 will be 1,150 days, which will be 3 years and 10 days. The persecution started on the 15th of Kislev, 148 BCE, and it ended on the 15th of Kislev, 145. Now, I had a problem with this. I couldn't understand how one author said 140, 48 and 145, and then the other author said 167 and 164. What was happening here is the Jewish writer was counting forward, and the other writer was counting backwards. That's how you will see what I'm talking about in a minute. This is where it started. On the 15th day of the month of Kislev, in the year 145, the king erected the desolating abomination upon the altar of burnt offering, and in the surrounding cities of Judah, they built pagan altars. So we in this book, the book of Maccabee, the first book of Maccabee 154, tells us when the persecution actually started. It started in the year 145. The king erected the statue of Zeus in the temple in Jerusalem, and he offered a pig on the altar of burnt offering. And he built pagan altars all around the city in the year 145. Let's go on. Now, this is where all the problems started. Is Second Maccabee, chapter 5, verse 11 through 14. Now, when that was done came to the king's ear, he thought that Judah had revolted. What was happening here is that there was a problem in Judah. Antiochus Epiphanes was in Egypt at the time, fighting a war, trying to win over Egypt to him. And he found out that there was something happening in Judah. So he thought it was a revolt, whereupon, removing out of Egypt in a furious mind, he was very angry when he left Egypt, and he took the city by force of arms. He came to Jerusalem, and he took the city by force, and look what he did. And he commanded his men of war not to spare such as they met. Anything they met on the road, kill it. That's what his orders were. To slay such as went up onto the houses. If you see anybody clearing the streets and run into the houses, go after them and kill them. Thus there was killing of young and old. This is Antiochus Epiphanes coming into Jerusalem when he started the persecution of the Jews. So there was killing of young and old, among making away of men, women, and children, slaying virgins and infants, and there were destroyed within the space of 3 whole days 80,000. That is 80,000 Jews were killed in 3 days. 40,000 were slain in the conflict, and 40,000 were sold into slavery within a 3-day period. This is how Antiochus Epiphanes moved into Jerusalem. Yet he was not content with this, but presumed to go into the most holy temple of all the world. Menelaus was the high priest in Jerusalem at the time. That traitor to the law, that traitor to his own country, being the guide of Antiochus Epiphanes. He took Antiochus Epiphanes into the temple. He took Antiochus Epiphanes against the Jews, and taking of the holy vessels with polluted hands and with profane hands, pulling down the things that were dedicated by other kings to the augmentation and the glory and the honor of the place, he gave them away. So this, I promise you, this is just scratching the surface. Who was Menelaus? Menelaus betrayed a guy by the name of Jason, who was from the royal priesthood. He was from the lineage of Aaron. Menelaus was not from the lineage of the high priest. He bought the position. So from this point on, from this day on, the high priest in Jerusalem was no longer of the lineage of Aaron. The high priest was a fake all the way up to the time when Jesus died on the cross. Let's go on. And he said unto me, 2,300 evenings and mornings, then shall the temple be cleansed. So I showed you in a few slides how bad it was for the Jews. 80,000 were killed in 3 days. They had the women parade through the streets with their dead babies on their breasts, and then those women were killed. The Jews were hiding in the caves. They were burned to death because they were celebrating the Sabbath. So this is what was taking place to the Jews around that time. But then it says, then shall the temple be cleansed. So we are looking at the cleansing of the temple now. This is important. First Marcus B 4:36. Then Judas and his brothers said, now that our enemies have been crushed. What happened was, Judas, his name was Judas Maccabeus. And what that means is, Maccabeus is, it means hammer. So Judas the hammer, or Judas the hammerer, or Judas the extinguisher. And when Judas died, the name went passed on to his brothers, and he had 5 brothers. Judas' father was the name of Mattathias, and he was the one who started the revolution. What happened was, Antiochus Epiphanes came to the little village in which they were living and said to Mattathias, you are a renowned man, you are the elder in the city. We would like you to have the honor of sacrificing to the a swine on the altar. And Mattathias said, no, that's not going to happen. You will have to kill me. Another Jew came forward and said, don't worry, I will do it. I will do it. And Mattathias got really angry. And what he did was he grabbed the knife out of the man's hand and slaughtered him on the altar. And in that rage, he also killed 5 of the soldiers that were there. And after that, he took his sons, Judas included. Judas was his 3rd son. And everybody who wanted to revolt against Antiochus Epiphanes, and they ran into the hills of Judah. That is where the war started between the Jews and Antiochus Epiphanes. So when their enemies were crushed, they said, let us go up and purify the sanctuary and rededicate it. So now a simple word here, let us go up. You always go up to Jerusalem. This is something you would bear in mind. You always go up to Jerusalem. So they were saying, let us go and purify the sanctuary and dedicate the sanctuary. So the whole army assembled and went up to Zion and found the sanctuary desolate. Now remember, it was 3 years that the temple was neglected. So it was desolated, and the altar was desecrated. There was pig blood on the altar, and the gates were burnt, and weeds were growing in the court as in a thicket on the side of the mountain, and the priest chambers were demolished. This is in the book of Marcus B. He chose blameless priests, devout to the law. Now, although Menelaus was now the high priest, there were still priests unto the Lord from Aaron's tribe, or Aaron's lineage. So he chose the blameless priests. These purified the sanctuary and carried away the stones of the defilement to an unclean place. They deliberated, and this is important. Verse 44 is important. They deliberated what ought to be done to the altar of burnt offering that had been desecrated. Now remember, they offered pigs on the altar. Antiochus Epiphanes offered pigs on the altar. He built an image of Zeus in the temple. So their altar was desecrated. So they were contemplating, what should we do with this altar? They decided it was best to tear it down, lest it be a lasting shame to them that the Gentiles had defiled it. So they tore down the altar and stored the stones in a suitable place on the Temple Mount until the coming of a prophet who would determine what to do with them. So they did not get rid of the stones. They just put it aside in a corner and they rebuilt an altar. This is what they did. Then they took uncut stones according to the law and built a new altar like the former. They also repaired the sanctuary and the interior of the temple. So we are talking about the cleansing of the temple. And they consecrated the court, and they made new sacred vessels and bought lampstands and the altar of incense and the table or the shewbread in the temple. Then they burnt incense on the altar and light the lamps on the lampstand, and they illuminated the temple. They also put loaves, remember I said the shewbread, on the table, and they hang curtains. Then they finished, thus they finished all the work they had taken. They rose early on the morning of the 25th day in the 9th month, that is the month of Kislev, in the year 148. So they were counting backwards from 145, 146, 147, 148. It was 3 years of persecution, and they rose up early to dedicate the temple again. They offered sacrifice according to the law on the new altar of for burnt offering that they made. For 8 days, they celebrated the dedication of the altar. And this is important. They did not rededicate the altar. They dedicated the altar because it was a new altar, and joyfully burnt offered burnt offering and sacrifices of deliverance and sacrifices of praise on the altar. They did that for 8 days. At this point is when they found a container of oil, and they light the menorah, and the oil was sufficient for 1 day, and it lasted 8 days. And this is where the feast of Hanukkah started. Then Judas and his brothers and the entire assembly of Jerusalem decreed that every year for 8 days, from the 25th day of Kislev, the day of dedication of the altar, and this is important, the dedication of the altar should be offered, observed with gladness and joy on the anniversary. This is where we got Hanukkah from. This is where we got the Feast of Dedication from. So this verse 52, and they rose early in the morning on the 25th day of the 9th month, that is the month of Kislev. This is where the Hanukkah started. This is where the Feast of Dedication started. Now, did God approve of that? Yes, he did. John chapter 10, verse 22 and 23. And it was at Jerusalem, the feast of the dedication, and it was winter, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. So Jesus approved of what the Judas Maccabeus did in Jerusalem, and the rededication of the temple and the dedication of the altar. This is what Jesus accepted. Although it was a period of silence, there were no prophets in those days. You remember they said we will wait until a prophet come and he will tell us what we should do with those stones. So there was no prophet at that time. And this is what they did. God accepted it, and Jesus approved of it. Let's go on. Verse 15. And it came to pass, when I, even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. Daniel wanted to know what is going on. He had no idea what was taking place. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai. Remember, at the very beginning, Daniel said he was in Susa, and he was in the vision, he was by the river Ulai, and a man's voice called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. Gabriel spoke to characters in the Bible 3 times. He spoke to Daniel twice, Zacharias, and he spoke to Mary. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell upon my face. And he said unto me, understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. This is a premise that you're going to see throughout the rest of the book. At the time of the end, at the latter time. So this vision that Daniel was seeing in the year 553 was not for that time, but for hundreds of years down the road. So he said, at the time of the end. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face towards the ground, and he touched me and set me upright. Daniel was like a rag doll. And he said, Behold, I will make thee to know that shall what shall be in the last end of the indignation, and at the time appointed the end shall be. So again, what you are seeing here is that when this vision will take place at the end, late down the road. Look at the next verse. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to fall, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. So again, the latter time. When will this take place? The latter time. Now, I am going through this a little fast. Don't worry, in chapter 9 and chapter 11, we will be revisiting chapter 8 because there will be a repeat of this same thing and we will get more information on this same situation. So when will the vision take place? The latter time, the end of time. Let's go on. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and holy people. Now, this verse can be applied to both little horns in chapter 7 and chapter 8. Now, I would like to point out, but not by his own power. This is something that we need to look at. But not by his own power. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 2, where is the source of his power? The dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. Not by his own power. So where did he get the power? From Satan himself. The dragon gave him his power. They worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, the source of the power, the dragon. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemy, and power was given unto him to continue 40 and 2 months. He did not have the power in himself. The power was, he became very powerful, but not by his own power. The power was given to him by Satan himself. Let's go on. And through his policy also, he shall cause craft to prosper, and in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many, and he shall stand up against the prince of the princes, but he shall be broken without hands. So this verse can also be applied to both little horns. He magnifying himself in his heart. By peace he shall destroy many. He will remember we just went through 80,000 killed in 3 days. This is nothing compared to what is going to happen during the tribulation period. Next verse, verse 26. And the vision of the evening and the morning, which was told, is true. The vision of the evening and the morning. Remember, we talk about that in Hebrew, Erev and Boka, evening and morning. And we are talking again about the daily sacrifice. It is true. You could use another term for evening and morning, that is the daily sacrifice. Therefore, shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. The same trend is continuing. It is not for this time, Daniel. It is not for the year 553. It is for days to come. And then look at this last verse. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick certain days. Afterwards I rose up and did the king's business. and I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. Now, Gabriel was talking to Daniel only. So when he said, and none understood it, Daniel is saying, I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. Now, I am teaching this chapter. I am no Gabriel. Imagine Daniel had somebody like Gabriel trying to explain to him what was going to take place, and he didn't get it. So it's not easy to get. However, we can look back and see what happened. We can look back and see the difference between the two horns. And the rest of the chapter, as I told you, the end of the chapter dealt with the little horn. And everything that we read dealt with the little horn. And what Antiochus Epiphanes, what he did to the Jewish people when he was in control. Now there is another horn that will be coming. And I said, this horn will come. This is the Antichrist. And he is going to do worse than what Antiochus Epiphanes did. And he's going to do worse to the Jewish people than what Antiochus Epiphanes did. So what I would strongly advise is that when Pastor Michael put this up on the website, that you go back and try to understand it step by step. If you have any questions, I would be so happy to answer it, and we can discuss it. I would make sure and do this before we do anything else. If you have any questions. Now, next week, we will be going back to Daniel chapter 5. This is chapter 8. So we went from Daniel 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 and 8. Now we're going back to Daniel chapter 5 and chapter 6. Those are two very simple chapters. We will deal with that one chapter in a night. So that's 2 weeks. We would knock out those two chapters, and then we'll get to chapter 9, 10, 11, and 12. They are even more difficult than Daniel chapter 8. So if you study Daniel chapter 8, you have any questions, I would answer the questions for you before we get to those difficult questions. We have 3 weeks to do that. So I hope you would take your time and study these chapters, read them over, read up chapter 5 and chapter 6, because those are the chapters we will be dealing with. So at this time, I would stop here and turn back to Pastor Michael.